Welcome everyone to the inaugural episode of our podcast series, DriversiTEA, Brewing Inclusive Conversations, brought to you by the CII Center of Excellence for Leadership and Watson University. I am Madhulina Das and I'm thrilled to be your host for this insightful journey into the realms of diversity, equity, inclusion and belongingness. Talking about our center, the CII Suresh Neotia Center of Excellence for Leadership is one of the 10 COAs set up for enhancing development and progress through a diverse range of services. Established in the year 2009, the center was initiated with the purpose of serving as a key facilitator of leadership development across various segments of business and socio-cultural demographics. The Watson University is the flag bearer of the first private universities in the young state of Telangana that is always bursting with energy and ideas. A pioneer in bringing new age programs in various fields, Watson creates robust platforms for learners to power through change and embrace disruptive technology. Whether in management, technology, design, architecture, liberal arts or law, School of Sciences, and much more. The theme of the podcast, while diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are trending keywords these days, and almost all organizations are talking about it, there is less real difference on the ground. Even if there are some statistics to show that there are organizational policies around DEI, but they are still too small to make a larger societal impact. The deep-rooted beliefs of exclusion practiced for generations are far too visible and easy to practice with long history behind it. And the comfort that many people have done things this way, hence, in the process, some divides that have been carried on for centuries just go on, such as the gender divide, the urban-rural divide, the socio-economic layers, the LGBTQ rights, the caste divide, the cancel culture, tokenism, and much more. And are just to name a few. With the first quarter of the 21st century almost behind us, we only need to question these, but also correct them if we want to make any substantial improvements in this century. Through this podcast series, we are trying to bring the various stakeholders together to have a better understanding of the diversity that defines us as a society, the equity and inclusion mindset that everyone needs to practice to create inclusive environments where everyone feels valued and respected and contributes to a holistic growth. Now, let me take the opportunity to introduce our esteemed guests for today's episode titled Breaking Bias Strategies for Everyday Inclusion. Joining us are Dr. Kakuli Sen and Mr. Chandra Duraiswamy, who bring extensive expertise and insights to our discussions. Dr. Kakuli Sen is the CAS-sustained Dean of the School of Business and Hamid Bauchiki Professor of Managerial Innovation at Watson University. Her distinguished career, marked by scholarly excellence and visionary leadership, delineates innovation and academic rigor. With a PhD in management, 8 years in corporate and 17 years in academia, Dr. Sen brings accelerating progress in academic leadership, institutional advancement, and international collaborations. She has managed diverse education systems, taught globally, and contributed to prestigious journals. As co-chair of the Center of Excellence, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Watson University, and professor and the dean at the School of Business, her rise in multiple fronts, including organizational behavior, HR management, and leadership training, is noteworthy. Mr. Chandra Duraiswamy has over 25 years of experience in marketing communications. He has humanized brands and leaders through inclusive storytelling, and he has also leveraged his communication expertise to break the bias and build awareness around LGBT+ and PWD inclusions from offices, shop floors. GE and NHRDN recognized his efforts with Inclusion Awareness Award in 2021 and LGBTQ+ Champion Award in 2022. He has guided over 15 organizations on their inclusion journey and is a sought-after speaker at HR events and inclusion conferences. Over to you, Dr. Sen.
so much, Madhulina, for that wonderful introduction and setting the stage right for the very first episode of this podcast series. And thank you so much, Mr. Chandra Durai Swami, to join in as the first guest of this series. With the kind of work that you've done, I think you are just the right person to set the stage right and start this conversation. And today we are going to be talking about breaking bias strategies for everyday inclusion. Though I have put together a few questions, I would like to start with an observation that I have on this word breaking bias. For the last some time, for the recent times, I've seen bias, just like mental health, has started cropping up in different conversations. People are talking about it, organizations are talking about it, there are articles being published, there are papers being published, and so on. I want to understand from you that what is this word which has suddenly become a buzzword, everybody's talking about it. What do we really understand from the word bias? If you could talk about it, please.
Thank you for inviting me to this podcast, Dr. Kakoli Sen and CII. It's a great opportunity to share some of my experiences on this topic with our audience today. Great question. A great question to tee off today's conversation. What is bias? And what are some of the day-to-day examples of bias as well? A strong feeling or a preconceived opinion that people have against a person or a group of people is what bias is all about. For example, I see a tall person walking into the room. Immediately, there's something called the bias that creeps into my mind. I probably think this person is very powerful. I probably think the cognitive ability of this person is extremely high. This person is very intelligent. When I see, similarly, a short person walking into the room, probably I assume the person is timid, the person is submissive, the person is subservient. I don't see this person as a leader. So this is a bias that I have. Research shows that people are influenced by such biases, and this has resulted in inequality. We may not have facts, we may not have data to show those attributes of a tall person or a short person, but nevertheless, the preconceived notions that I have of these two set of audience actually gives rise to bias, and this bias gives rise to inequality. Research has shown that tall people end up making 130% more than shorter people. So this is manifestation of a bias. So you have a preconceived notion about somebody or a group of people, and then you take that to drive your decisions, and that propagates discrimination. Mm-hmm. And sometimes can go further to fuel hate and harm as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. But while you were speaking, Mr. Durai Swami, I was also wondering that there must be some background, some reason, or some, over time, these biases get built. When I see a tall person and I feel, or a good-looking person, or somebody who, for some reason, I assume that they are also good at something else, whereas I don't really see a connection because probably I'm meeting that person for the first time. But there must be some basis on which these biases are formed. Would you like to tell us something about that?
I'll point another example to you to explain this particular incident that happened. A few years ago, when I was traveling all the way from US to India, I was coming back after a work assignment. I stepped into the flight and I noticed the two pilots on the huge aircraft were women. Immediately, I felt anxious because I've never seen women drive or women pilot such huge aircraft. Look at the weight of the aircraft, look at the wingspan of the aircraft, look at 300 plus people seated in the aircraft. I've never had two women pilots who were going to bring us on a transatlantic journey. I was fearful. And every little turbulence that we encountered on the way, I was constantly thinking, are these people doing a good job? Are they not tired? How are they going to ensure that they don't fall asleep? So all these questions, because we've had some accidents happen, but nothing with respect to women. We've had some airline accidents that have happened, people falling at the wheel, so on and so forth, but nothing with respect to women. So I was a little anxious. But at the end of this trip, I realized that I had a data point today. And I said, I need to throw this fear. I need to throw this anxiety that women will not be able to pilot such huge aircrafts and get so many people on their shoulders, and get them to their families safely. So that is a bias that I had. I corrected myself. So every time I come up with a similar bias, I always remind myself, hey, what did I think of women pilot on that particular journey from US to India, and how did I correct my own bias and my own perception with data?
That's a great thing to do. Mr. Chandra, I was just wondering that did we somewhere connect the flying of the aircraft with the physical strength of the pilot? Because whether it's a man or the woman, in the cabin where they are flying, the machinery doesn't know who's flying them. As long as they push the right buttons, as long as they do the right things, right assessments, it doesn't really matter because there is no physical strength involved in it. So I'm just wondering that, you are a conscious person and you did the analysis and accordingly you corrected yourself. But when there are other situations when people make these assumptions and take decision, because for you that decision was taken, the pilot was going to fly the plane, whether you are scared, you are happy, you're relaxed, did not really matter. That decision was taken by somebody. We were just part of that decision. But when we had, suppose somebody is in the power to decide that whether a woman will fly the plane or not, and then it could, I think it could, cause a lot of damage there. But my question was that how do we form that bias? What I was also thinking that, as far as I understand, these, humans, our human brains are wired to make sense of things, all the thousands of things that are floating around us, or information that we are continuously bombarded with. We try to make sense of things, and we try to put things into some kind of boundaries. And from there, and also from our own experiences, if we feel that, or if we have seen that some tall people, taking your previous example, some tall people have been successful, they have been confident, they have been able to achieve something which is of worth. And so then our mind makes a connection that, okay, if there's a tall person, if the successful person was tall, probably all tall people will also be successful, and likewise. So we make these connections, and that is how gradually those, without even knowing, we start making those unconscious decisions based on these unconscious biases. So that's a great example that you said. What are the different kinds of biases do you think all of us carry? Of course, all of us have biases. But what are the different kinds of biases do you think that we have?
Research says there are more than 175 documented biases. I may not be able to share all of them, but I will share some of them.
Yes, please.
Confirmation bias is something that we all have. Listening to a piece of information, and then we confirm our existing beliefs. For example, when I went to do my master's in the US in 97, before I left, my father sat me down and he gave me some life advices. One of the things that he said to me was, be careful of African Americans. I don't know why he said that. But then your father says that you're going to a nation that you've never been, you're young, so you just absorb all of this. I had it in the back of my mind. Every time, my university was there in the downtown.
Mm-hmm.
So you can naturally see a lot of African Americans. I went to Chicago, so you can see a lot of African Americans in south side of Chicago. Every time I saw a black person, an African American, I felt unsafe. I was constantly replaying that piece of information that my father had given me, that was amplifying, and I was trying to avoid them. I was trying to not have eye contact with them. I probably thought that they were going to harm me, so I kept that distance with them. To confirm my bias, what happened was I was also mugged. I was taking all the cash that I brought in my hand, and I was going to the bank in the downtown to deposit the money and start an account, and I was mugged at that point by somebody from the African American community. And that stayed as a trauma in my life. I ran away from them. I went into the bank and I deposited my cash, but I was afraid to come out of the bank after that. And I stayed in the bank for 2 hours, and I tried to call one of my friends to come and take me back to the university. It took me 4 years after that to actually break that bias and to say that this is just one-off incident, until I had an African American who was a part of my team in my business school 4 years later. Once I started to interact with them, understand them, I was able to break that bias. Similarly, we have a lot of biases. For example, you're at the university. I will tell you the biases that people bring in when they recruit. For example, they recruit from an Ivy League or an IIT, IIM kind of a school. Immediately they think, oh, this is a great school. We need to pay these people much more than the others. There's a discrimination that happens there. They already take one attribute of a person, saying that you come from a business school, you come from IIT, you come from IIM, and they create a halo bias around them.
Yes.
That you are probably the best. Another example, you go into a negotiation. Somebody voices their opinion in terms of a price, or probably puts out their voice in terms of a price. And then the conversation builds on from there. So that is called anchoring bias. They've already anchored a bias in the system, and they're misleading the entire system, whereas people get led by a particular characteristic, which is only price and not beyond price in terms of quality or other attributes needed. Somebody's in a job, usually March, April is an appraisal time for us in the workspace. There's something called the recency bias. Most people leaders remember probably the last incident, whether that is good or bad, and they use that incident to appraise their team member without realizing that they could have done so many more good things before that they may have forgotten. And there's familiarity bias as well. Sometimes people from a particular industry probably go back to their same alumni or go back to their same hometown to recruit from the same colleges. Right? So there is a familiarity bias. They probably think people from a particular region are really good, or people from a particular region are bullies, are very aggressive. So those kind of biases are also there, and we must be constantly aware of it. Every time you make a decision on somebody, ask yourself this question: is there a data behind this? Can I prove this, or is this just a bias? Or how can I disprove this particular opinion that I hold of somebody or a group of people?
That's a very important thing. What I also believe, Mr. Chandra, is that all of us have these biases, and that there is a reason why they are called unconscious biases, because we are not even aware of that. There is the affinity bias, or the familiarity bias, or the beauty bias, or the confirmation bias, conformation bias. If everybody is saying so, it must be so. So, and then there are halo error that you talked about, the horns effect also, just the opposite also happens. But if you look at it, there are reasons why these biases have, come up. And like you said, your father, when he was sending you, he sent you with a word of caution. Among other things, he cautioned you about a particular group of people. Chances are that if he did not have any such experience, somebody else had some experience somewhere, and a number of frequently enough so that bias the mind made up a decision that, okay, this has happened so many times, and happened by a similar group of people. So then we put two and two together and we say, okay, so we these people, you need to be aware of these people. Not that mugging is only happening because of a certain section of people. It is happening, maybe with so many people, so many other times, by so many other people. But because our mind has established, based on some frequency, that this is what we will kind of infer out of this, and then these biases get formed. So all of us have these biases. However, as long and there is no way that we can say, okay, I don't have a bias. Everybody has these biases. The point is that when these biases start impacting our judgments or our decisions, then they may have a problem. So what do you think about this? That why is it important to know what the biases are, and how can they impact in organizations? What role can they play, a negative role in organizational decision making?
That's a great question. Let me start with the research statistics that says 60% of people in the workplace complain that there's bias. This could be the way they were recruited. This could be the way they were treated. It could be the way they were appraised. This could be the way they were promoted or not promoted, so on. So the entire employee value, across the employee value life cycle, they have reported more than 60% bias. If you look at the pyramid of hate, bottom of the pyramid of hate is nothing but bias. Bias fuels prejudice. Prejudice fuels discrimination. Discrimination fuels hate. Hate fuels violence. This is a magnificent pyramid. If you lay it down, bottom is just the bias. The bias is one that actually propagates stereotypes. Using my father's example, he said, African Americans, be careful. So that was a stereotype that was being created. That stereotype if it continued to stay with me, and as I grew up in my career, every time I saw a candidate coming from a particular community or a race, I would immediately say, no, I don't want to recruit them. I don't want to hire them. I don't want them as a part of my team. I don't want them to give a particular vote. So that is going to create inequality. That is going to create exclusion. That is going to be against diversity. Diversity is also going to affect the culture of an organization. I repeat again, diversity affects the culture of an organization. Policies not equal culture. It is people that equals culture of the organization. Right. People are the ones who build the culture of the organization. Bottom line and top line, it impacts productivity. It impacts innovation. It impacts profitability. It impacts talent attraction, talent retention. This is what it does, and it ruins the organization. So if you fuel bias in the organization, if you let it to grow into prejudice, into discrimination, eventually the organization is going to suffer.
True. So, not everyone like you will be able to analyze one's own thought process and behavior and perception and come out with, okay, this is a wrong bias that I have and I need to, work around it. How do you think people would be able to understand what their biases are? First step is to understand, to recognize what your bias is. Only then you can work on them. So how do you think people will be able to should be able to recognize and then work and overcome their own biases?
I come from a generation that still opens up the newspaper every morning. Mm-hmm. I'm not one. I do like to read digitally, but at the same time, I love a physical newspaper. Whenever I read a newspaper, I just finished one, I have a pencil with me. And every time I see a bias, I underline the bias. The bias in so many different ways. I'm a marketing communication guy. So I can really see sometimes when organizations say the global organization, the image that they use to represent a global organization is only white people.
Yeah.
I'm like, why? Why can't we have multiracial people as a part? A lot of Indian advertisements as well, right? The moment you put a white person, the product sells. They're just capitalizing on the bias that we all have. And we need to be aware of it, that this is a bias, and I am not going to let this fuel my decision or influence my decision to make a purchase. The choice of words, for example, I'll give you another example. It could be either a headline or it could be a byline in a newspaper. The impeached US president addressed the college students versus the former US president addressed the college students. The moment you use the word impeached, your brain is going to latch on to all the wrong things that the person may have done. Yeah. You're going to latch on to all the negative experiences. Whereas when you remove that particular word impeached, when you replace that with a former president, that becomes more neutral. Our newspapers, our news channels constantly fuel this bias. It could be age-related bias. It could be gender-related bias. They're in the name of reporting as is. Sometimes we need to also ask ourselves this question, am I fueling bias? So I gave you an example of images that are being used. I gave you an example of how words that are being used to fuel as well. Sometimes hair color, texture, hair texture, age, etc. are also used to fuel bias. For example, this particular, I don't want to name a particular product. There's an FMCG product that is being used for making people look fairer. So look at what is being used and what is being fueled. There's a bias that is being fueled, that black is anything which is brown, anything that is not white is not beauty, is what it is fueled. And you use my product and you show somebody who's in a darker shade, but then they suddenly look more confident when they apply this product. I mean, how true is that? You're just fueling more bias in the system. So we need to consciously ask ourselves, is there a data point? Am I being misled? Can I see what is below the iceberg, what is below the surface? Because we only see what is above the surface and we make a decision. There's a huge portion of it that is below the surface as well. So we need to go down and look at that and then make a decision for ourselves. 2 days before, I think it was yesterday morning, I saw a newspaper article again talking about a 24-year-old woman killing a man. The first thing that when I read the article, I'm like, really? Women are supposed to be more compassionate. They're supposed to be more empathetic. They're supposed to be less violent. How did this all happen? Because these are all again stereotypes sitting on your head, right? Every day when I look at the newspaper, I bust so many stereotypes that I carry. And you constantly, those are like bubbles. They keep frothing up and they keep coming on the surface, and you have to constantly defroth. You need to remove them from your head. So, but the moment they could have written the byline much better. Youth kills somebody. Rather than trying to bring the women angle, portray that, women can be violent. Why do you want to take gender as a weapon to fight against each other? They could have done
But I think they have their own reasons. And that's a matter of another podcast altogether. That, whatever people are, whatever that latching or the anchoring that you talked about, they are using that so that, there is more interest. If we just put it in the form of a news, nobody wants that news, because news is available much before it can come on the TV or newspaper. The news is all over the internet. So it comes to you much earlier and faster than the traditional modes. But the traditional modes need to repackage the same information in a different way to catch attention. So, well, that is a topic of, another discussion, and some other time maybe. I want to move forward in this, and I want to understand why it is important for organizations to create an inclusive environment. And what do you think organizations are doing? Are there some organizations which are doing better, and some which are not quite there, and there is a need to do it? So how do you think it is becoming an organizational activity, and why is it so important for the organizations to do it?
Like I said earlier, there's a lot for the organization to gain in terms of productivity, in terms of profitability, in terms of innovation, if they create an equitable, fair workplace for everybody. I'm going to throw a statistic at our audience. Research shows only 25% of the organizations in India have a DEI policy. 75% of them don't have a DEI policy. Which means you don't even have a policy, let alone addressing inequalities. You don't have a policy, which means the entire system is tilted towards a particular set of individuals, and those are the ones who can succeed. Surveys, for example, are a great employee surveys that some organizations do year on year. Some of them do half yearly, quarterly. All of that is a great tool for organizations to understand their people, their policies, and their processes. Just because there's a policy, we think it works for everybody. Absolutely not. Policy is just a guideline. It is not for everybody because all of us come from different backgrounds. Our needs, our life experiences are very different. So you need to make sure it is just a guideline, but you can go above and beyond. Which means from the feedback, organizations can go back and say, what is it that I can do to make sure our culture is a lot more inclusive? It could be starting off an ERG. It could be breaking a particular bias by hiring people from a different set of community who are not seen in the workplace. Could be so many. Next is for people to be able to speak up. Many a times you don't have helplines or hotlines where people can call in and report when there's a discrimination that is happening. When you don't have a policy, why will you have a hotline? So a lot of discrimination that happens on the ground goes unreported. There needs to be a hotline where people can speak up without fear of retaliation. And there should be an ombuds who can actually get in and understand what is happening and give a solution. Third is open, fair, and transparent communication from the leadership. Just as how we have bias, people have bias against leadership as well. That nobody talks about. So let's try and break those biases as well. That is one of my objectives in terms of trying to humanize our leaders. We always look at leaders as though, they're the commander-in-chief and we just need to obey. But at the end of the day, they're still humans. They can err. And we need to show the human side of leaders as well. Microaggression is another topic that is seldom discussed about. Whatever the words that we say, sometimes you may find it very appreciating. For example, many years ago, I followed my aunt who had come down for my graduation in the US. She was driving from New Jersey to Rhode Island. Once my graduation got over, what are you going to do here? Why don't you come and spend a few days with me? I said, okay, I will follow you. I drove my car and I was following her. It took 2.5 hours for me to reach her home. Many a times, she would be way ahead of me. And then I felt difficult to keep up with her. I got off the car, went into the house, had a glass of water, and I said, oh my God, you drive so well. I didn't realize much later in life that the statement that I made today was not appreciation, but it was microaggression. And I taught myself not to speak this way to anybody. When you have people from a certain not so privileged background, when they do really well, don't go tell them, I feel so inspired looking at you. You're doing so well. There's certain other ways of saying it, but not this way where it fuels microaggression. I'll finish this particular answer with a quote from Peter Drucker. He says, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Absolutely true. So, as we were talking about that these biases get built over years, and then they start either by your own experience or by somebody else's experience or by reading or propagation in some way or the other, and then they become very hardcore stereotypes and which are difficult to break, and then that continues and starts coloring our decision making and in that case, it starts excluding people. Like you said, you started excluding people of certain group only because you had your own bias. So all of us have these personal biases, and they are okay to have, and they will be there. But it is very important to understand that these are our biases, and we need to work around them. Going forward, I was thinking, Mr. Duraiswamy, would you know of some organizations which could be taken as examples of doing very well in this building the culture of diversity and inclusion by breaking biases, which is also the theme of this podcast? And do you think some of them have more? Some sectors or organizations have more of these biases, and maybe there are others who are doing very good. So maybe you could share some examples with us.
Perfect. See, bias, like what you said, bias is everywhere. It's omnipresent, omnipotent. It is not present in one particular sector or industry. It is just so prevalent across every. I'll give you a few examples where there's some biases and how some organizations have broken those biases. Manufacturing is a male bastion. It's extremely hard for women to go there and survive. It's only men. It's all about men. It's all about being strong. It's all about muscles, all of that. But then women can do equally well. That's an example where there's bias in manufacturing, that women can't do a great job. Next is banking, financial services. It's got a very positive bias there. It is the only sector that's been able to absorb people with disability. If you look at BFSI in India, Tata Group has been leading the pack, and Accenture and so on and so forth. They've been able to absorb a lot of people with disability as a part of their organization, which is a good kind of bias, but that needs to go beyond BFSI, banking, financial services vertical, and that should be across every vertical. Technology. When you think of technology, three things that come to our mind: Bangalore, Hyderabad. Look at the regional bias that we have as well, right? Any place can be developed as a capital. Bangalore had an advantage because of its climate. And Bangalore is quickly losing out on the climate over the last 20 years. And today Bangalore is already there without water. So that is a bias that people use because people felt that, oh, I worked in the Silicon Valley, the weather is pretty similar to Bangalore, so I will come here and stay. And they've just capitalized Bangalore and Hyderabad as technology and startup capitals. They can continue to exist anywhere. There's bias for a particular age group of people. It's very hard for you to find 50 plus people in the IT industry because they're high cost resource. They always want to replace those high cost resource with somebody who can be trained and who will be a low cost to the organization. So there's so much of ageism that is there as well. Ageism, PWD, women, example, in manufacturing. So I've shared a couple of examples. You can't even find a trans person. They're mostly hidden. LGBTQ people are hidden in organizations. They don't wish to share their identity because of the taboo and the bias. So I've shared some of the examples of where biases are prevalent. This is not the complete list. This is just a representative list that came up in my mind. I will share now some success stories that are effective and how organizations have tackled. First, I'd like to call out Lemon Tree in the hospitality industry. In the hospitality industry, anybody who stays in the front desk, mostly they try and have women. They want to capitalize on the beauty bias. They want to capitalize, women are much better, more hospitable. They want to capitalize on all the biases that we all have. And third, who would want to see a PWD person, a person with disability at the front desk? Lemon Tree broke that particular bias and they said, we're going to have people with disability on the front desk helping our guests. A lot of people thought this would backfire on their brand, but it actually helped them build their brand to be more inclusive.
Absolutely.
Tata Motors, Ashok Leyland, Ola, Kirloskar, all of them have set up an all-woman operated assembly line.
Yes.
I'll give you a name of a state in India, Tamil Nadu. 43% of manufacturing in India work in Tamil Nadu. So Tamil Nadu has done really well compared to other states, which considers manufacturing as a male bastion. They said, we're going to set up all these units. The Tata Motors that I talked about, the Ashok Leyland, the Ola, all of them have their bases in Tamil Nadu as well. Kochi Metro.
Correct.
One of the first organizations in India that decided we're going to hire trans people. They went ahead and hired 30 trans people. They sensitized their employees, they sensitized their public, saying that these are the people that you're going to be seeing on our metro. Be kind, be respectful. They are our employees. So these are some of the success stories that I could think about in terms of how organizations are breaking bias and making the entire society feel more included and welcomed.
That's a wonderful, those are great names, and those are big names also. While you were speaking about them, I was also wondering that perhaps, every other organization, as you rightly said, that majority of the organizations do not even have a DEI policy, which is understandable, because probably they are trying to still survive. They are trying to, make sure that the business is still happening, and for them, DEI doesn't become a priority at all. And then from there, the bias comes and the stereotype follows that, these are only the bigger companies can do it. The smaller companies cannot afford to do it. Though it doesn't take a lot to bring in diversity. It may make more business sense. It may create markets. It may create a better work environment. Doesn't take too much to have a diverse, environment at workplace. But the notion or the unconscious bias comes that we are a small organization. We are struggling with what needs to be done on a daily basis. Than afford the luxury of doing any kind of diversity, equity, inclusive practices. So and then that goes on. My probably last and final question would be that, you talked about these large organizations which are bringing people from, diverse communities. Who I'm assuming that they are also helping their own communities to come forward and become, economically independent. How do you think, as individuals, people can overcome their biases, be more inclusive in nature, and fight that that discrimination that comes very naturally to all of us without even realizing? Probably we don't want to, but somehow, some way or the other, by words or actions, we become or we practice discrimination. How do you think we could overcome that? How can we have the allyship which will help us move towards that?
Absolutely. That's a great question to finish our conversation today. For this question, I'm going to share a little experience. I've been discriminated every time when I went out looking for a home to rent. When I go tell the landlord I'm single, they don't want to rent out. This was prior COVID. I mean, I've had this experience many times, but this was particularly prior COVID. I went to a person's home. There was a to let board outside. So I stepped in and I said, is this place still available? Can I take a look at it? The first question that I was asked is, are you married? Are you single? So I said, I'm single. They did not want to let this place to a single person. Immediately he said, I've had trouble with single men who've lived in this property before. Police have come in search of them, and I've had to go through some bad experiences. I'm not willing to let this place for single people. Immediately, I countered his experience by saying that I'm willing to give you references. You can call my earlier landlord. You can call my organization. I work at the executive level at another organization. I said, you can have a conversation with them before. You can do your background checks on me. The man wasn't convinced. But then, when I looked up, I found, I'm not going to mention the religion, but then when I looked up, I saw a particular God that he prays to, and the God is single. So I immediately turned around and asked a question: is that God that you're praying to every day single or married? I said, if he's single, has he caused you any trouble? And I left the place. I didn't rent the house. He didn't want to engage with me any further. But then I just wanted to prove a point. I wanted to speak up, and I wanted to say this is a bias that you have. And I'm willing to equip you with data and information for you to feel safe to rent your property to me. So, and many years ago, I wrote a column in Times of India, the Chennai edition, called Single in the City. So I talked about all the discrimination that single people will have to go through. For example, in clubs, they say there's no stag entry allowed. In movie halls, they say there's a couple seat. And then when you go on vacation and stuff like that, they say, oh, there's a companion fare that is available, so bring a companion away. Actually, single people end up paying more taxes than people who are paired up. Everywhere around the globe, this happens. So the entire system itself is against single people, and I called out many such instances. One, I would say, is to be self-aware. Ask yourself, is this bias? Do I have data points to show people that this is bias? Or can I show myself that this is bias? Be willing to speak up. Don't hold back. Raise awareness in the society. Speak up for other people as well, not just for you. Speak up for other people, and that is where allyship happens. Every time I go back and I create awareness in the shop floor or in the office floors on LGBTQ awareness, I break the myths. I tell them this is not a Western phenomenon. I said this naturally occurs. We've always been a very inclusive and welcoming culture. But somewhere we've been waylaid, and we've just become so discriminatory that we need to come back and accept people as they are. And give examples from our own history and from our own mythology, saying that how inclusive we've been, the storytelling, the art, the culture. So you use all of that to convey the story and break people's biases and give them an opportunity to experience what it is. It is not just sharing all these data points, but also take them along with you. And I used to tell people, let's go meet a couple of trans people. Let's find out. Let's learn about their life. Let them also learn about what happens in our workplace. When we invite people, when we go into their personal space, professional space, we are able to break those biases.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. DriversiTEA, for sharing that. I strongly believe in what you said just a while back, that when you were not able to get the house because of your marital status, you turned around and looked at the God and said, well, you are praising somebody, you are worshipping somebody on a daily basis, and he's not caused you harm. So why do you think why have you inferred, or for some maybe he's had some experience, but that doesn't mean that we have to look at everybody with the same lens. So but that is what he has thought of, and probably anybody who's coming, they are not challenging the way you did. So it was very important to raise your voice or voice your concerns, that it's okay, you don't have to give the house, but don't hold it against people of a certain group, and because that's not true. That's a bias which has unconsciously gone into it, settled down, and made it into a stereotype. You are not the only person who will not give your house for rent to such people. You will also tell your own friends, relatives, and other people, and that stereotype will become strong and cause difficulty to other people. So I do take this word that it is very important to speak up. Allyship, speaking up, recognizing that there is a bias that all of us have. What kind of bias do we have? Why is it important to overcome that, and how to overcome that? These are the things that we need to focus. And with that, we come to the end of this first podcast. Thank you so much, Mr. Chandra DriversiTEA. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you about the biases that all of us have. And let's hope we can become more and more conscious about these biases, and try and overcome, so that we look forward to a bias-free society. in a long time, I think, but at least we make that effort towards that direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kakulisan. Thank you, CII, for this opportunity to be able to share some of my experiences and some examples to help our audiences understand more about bias.
Great. Thank you. Thank you once again. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.